It's great to see all of you virtually. And on behalf of the ACEC Research Institute's Board of Directors, welcome to our next roundtable in our series, The Future of Engineering. A big thank you to our donors whose continued support and funding have made this session possible. We have a great group of thought leaders here today that are going to share their expertise and insights with us on the future of renewables, sustainability, and net zero. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce two of my colleagues from the ACEC Research Institute, Joe Bates, who will serve as our moderator for today's session, and Kevin McMahon, who will be monitoring that chat box Carrie mentioned and facilitating your questions during the session. So Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks Daphne, and welcome again to everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day. First, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We really have a very unique and special group today. First, we have Tommy Wells, who is a former Washington, D.C. council member, and he currently is the director of the Department of Energy and Environment for the Washington, D.C. government. So Tommy's going to be bringing us the governmental perspective today. He was appointed to his current position in January of 2015, and he is chiefly responsible for protecting the environment and conserving the natural resources of the District of Columbia. Tommy leads a team of approximately 300 environmental professionals collectively working to improve the quality of life for residents and the natural inhabitants of the nation's capital. So welcome today, Tommy. We appreciate you being here with us. We also have Lisa Murner, who is the Director for Innovation and Sustainability Technology at Dominion Energy, which is one of the largest energy providers in the country. She's responsible for the management and direction of a team that performs technical research and evaluations on various things such as technology, automation and robotics, fuel conversion and power generation technologies, infrastructure solutions, transportation solutions, decarbonization technologies, and artificial intelligence. And that's just a few of the things. So Lisa is again bringing us a perspective from the energy sector, which I think will be very unique. And we appreciate you being here today with us, Lisa. We also have Andy Solberg, who is Global Technology Leader at Jacobs, and he's focused on the distribution, energy systems, and net zero facility design that enables society's transition to 100% renewable energy. He currently leads the company's facility modeling and analytics practice, and a team of engineers providing the front-end engineering design for renewable energy systems, as well as many other areas. Thank you for being with us today, Andy. And finally, we have Roger Frechette, who is the managing principal at Interface Engineering. He's responsible for the design of the MEP systems and overall engineering management on a variety of projects within the continental US and around the world. Roger is a senior fellow with the Design Futures Council, which is a global network of design community professionals, and he also is a frequent lecturer and author on high performance design and green engineering. We have a wonderful and very diverse and talented set of panelists today. So we are going to jump right into the questions in just a second. First, I'd like to set the stage. Of course, we have been living through a pandemic that has not occurred since before most of our lifetimes. And we now have a new administration as well, which really changes the focus on climate change, which was not really a focus of the last 4 years. And we're also looking at increasing the energy that is applied to sustainable and renewable sources. So a lot is changing in just a few months' time. And we're going to see from our panelists what this means for the AE industry. Now, first, I'd like to ask Kevin, my fellow moderator and colleague, to explain what is net zero and what does it mean, Kevin?
Thanks, Joe. Net zero energy is a concept defined by the use of energy conservation, energy efficiency, and on-site renewable generation to account for 100% of a targeted specific building or community's energy usage. It can be applied to neighborhoods, states, or the entire US as an example. It is the state that exists when the amount of energy provided by on-site renewable energy sources is equal to or equivalent to the amount of energy used, and that becomes net zero. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure. So we're going to be focusing a lot on net zero today and on the focus of the industry in achieving net zero and whether it's going to be possible. So my first question I want to start out with, and I'm going to ask Roger to start us off with this, is can we achieve net zero goals? And how does net zero relate to opportunities for the AE industry? Roger?
Well, thank you. I would say the answer to the question is yes. We can design net zero energy buildings. In fact, around the country, you'll find hundreds of them that have been designed and constructed already. There is an organization known as the New Buildings Institute that tracks net zero energy buildings. And if you were to check out their website, they'll show you not only the buildings that have been designed, built, and verified as operating at net zero, there also show all of the projects that are currently underway, under construction, or in the stages of measuring their buildings, and anticipate that ultimately they will achieve net zero. And a number of those buildings, fortunately, are in our region.
Okay. Andy, what's your take on this?
Oh, I agree with Roger. Yeah, they're not only achievable, there's a history of them being achieved. The little context is that there is a level where it becomes more difficult. So low rise, mid rise buildings, you could typically meet the definition as Kevin described, where you have an energy balance occurring within site boundaries. When you get into high rise and start in the manufacturing environments, data centers, you're seeing a model which is, when you look at it, when you draw the bubble around the bigger picture, you can get net zero, but the renewable energy parts are just, they're separate from that facility itself. I think it's an important distinction for everyone to understand, is that organizations are reaching an energy balance, but the assets are separated off of the site. So as we move to decarbonization in the world, you're going to see that connection with renewables that are maybe hundreds, thousands of acres that are disconnected from the actual facility itself. And that's really for high energy use intensity facility types.
Okay. What about this notion of positive energy and beyond net zero? Is that something that is realistic in the next 20 years or so? Roger, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so. As Kevin talked to start us off, the definition of net zero is a very specific point. It's that point in which on site you are producing as much energy as you're consuming, and but it is a point, and a lot of the net zero energy projects that we are seeing, they exceed that mark, meaning they are in fact delivering more energy through the course of the year than the building itself is consuming. So those buildings are by definition positive energy buildings, and we are seeing a growing number of those projects. Specific to our area, it is a challenge as the buildings get taller to be able to provide that amount of on-site renewable energy. You're generally limited to putting these technologies on the roof of the building. So unless you have a lot of site surrounding the building, you are up against that limit of height. So most of the buildings that have currently been certified or verified as being net zero energy or positive energy tend to be 1, 2, 3 stories tall. But we have one example in the District of Columbia now that is 5 stories tall. So we are pushing that limit.
Okay. And Andy, you were talking about the fact that you'll have these resources that are separated from the building themselves for high rises, and how are those buildings making the most use of the energy they have? What types of things are you doing to build into those or build the buildings?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because the core concept of creating a net zero building is really you're starting from the design principles of the building first and foremost. So you don't drop energy efficiency out of the equation just because you have ability to meet everything with renewables. So you still do the traditional things that you would think about energy efficiency, as well as all the new things that are coming about. One of the big things, though, to mention is electrification. So getting rid of fossil-based heating. So if you have a big thermal load in different climates, that will be a big deal. So you see, it might be easier to reach net zero building status in a more temperate climate. As you go up and you have higher heating demands, you're going to have to be using electrification of heat, and heat pump technology is one that's been coming around even at large scale with big heat recovery chillers. So that's definitely an area that needs to be thought about. And then on the positive energy side, I just wanted to add a little bit more there. It's a really important thing that it creates a tie back. Maybe Lisa will talk to it, but there is a really important tie that these net zero buildings don't mean they're an island by themselves. There is a broader connection with the community, and they can have a positive impact on the grid when controlled correctly.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm sure some of you all saw that Tesla, for instance, they're not actually making money off their cars yet, but they're making money off of selling their carbon credits to other companies. So this is a really interesting point, and I'm going to turn to Lisa now. Since we're talking about energy and electrification, Lisa, how are you at Dominion Energy helping the industry to achieve net zero? And on the flip side of that, what does the industry need to do to help you?
Yeah, so a good question. Thank you. So what we're doing first and foremost is making the electricity that we provide to our customers green, because there is a big trend toward electrification of buildings, electrification of heat, electrification of transportation. So we're making our electricity as green as it can be. We have a goal by 2050 to be net zero. That's for carbon dioxide and natural gas. So we're an electric and a gas company. So on the electric side, really striving to go all renewables. So we're building a giant offshore wind project off the coast of Virginia Beach. We've already built one off the coast of Virginia Beach, building, about 1,000 megawatts of solar a year. So really investing heavily in renewable energy. So when we sell you electricity to use for your buildings, it's green. We're doing the same thing with our natural gas business. So it's a little bit more of an early effort, but we're trying to green our natural gas stream. So we're using renewable natural gas, which comes from hogs and cows, right? Methane that would otherwise go up into the atmosphere. We're also starting to blend hydrogen. And if it's green hydrogen, zero emissions hydrogen, it's green, blend that into our gas system. So we're trying to green our natural gas just like we're greening our electricity. So that's how we're helping.
As engineers and architects are designing these buildings to be net zero, is there anything that they need to know about or do that is, in terms of interfacing with Dominion or other electric providers that might be different from the way they did things in the past?
No, I don't think so. I think we just need open communications about what you're doing. Metering has sometimes been an issue in the past. If you've got a multi-tenant building, instead of 1 meter, you've got, let's say, 500 meters or 50 meters, and 10% of those people want to go green and the rest don't. There can be some issues there, but no, I don't think so. I mean, we're all focused on the same thing. We're all focused on getting greener, and that's regardless of the administration, regardless of the politics. Going green, solar, wind, they're now in the money compared to other opportunities.
Okay, so that's a great segue to Tommy. So Tommy, you're in the government. You've been an elected official. How can you, from the government side, help the industry, and what does the industry need to do to help you as we all try to reach this goal of net zero?
So without question, the way you frame that is that it's a partnership, that the government can't just be setting goals. So you have to meet these goals and such. We have to help support that as a partnership. So DC is a city of about 700,000 people, just for scale. So we provide about 25 to $30 million a year to a sustainable energy utility to do retrofits on buildings. And it's, you know, beyond just changing out the LED light bulbs. It's now getting deeper into more strategic decarbonization. And this contract we have with our SEU, their performance is over 5 years. So it's not just the one-offs that they can get done in 1 year, and they employ and use small companies, engineering firms throughout DC to do the retrofits. The other thing we do is we just stood up a DC Green Bank. A lot of the technologies that we're talking about, if they're part of a new building or even a major renovation, that the finance world is a very conservative world. So if you're bringing in a new technology to say you're going to harvest geothermal off the sewer pipe that goes by your building, like the American Geophysical Union did in DC, then it may be hard to get financing for something like that, because it's are you building in a cost that's not understood. So we're standing up the DC Green Bank, and it will be funded. We'll capitalize it with about $115 million. And what their job is to do is to either take the first risk on loans or to actually provide financing at low cost for new innovations, new technologies that others may not do. Then the other is we have just stood up the DC Building Innovation Hub, and we're funding that at about $400,000 to $500,000 a year. And it's in partnership with the private developers and building owners in the city. And the purpose of the Building Innovation Hub is that once you put new technologies in a building, they're useless unless you know how to operate them. And then you're going to have changeover in staff and your building operators. So the Building Innovation Hub is to continue to provide training, support, and hopefully be like a help desk when they say, you know, we have this new air source heat pump or heat exchanger that how, you know, where do we go? How do we do this? But also be a place where firms from across the world can come and show what they're doing. I took a group from the Building Innovation, from the developer group to Copenhagen and then to Brussels before the shutdown, to just learn from them how were they getting to net zero, and they have a different approach to how they harvest and use energy. Obviously the passive house standard, which goes to high-rise buildings in Brussels. So it's a partnership to where we teach, but also introduce concepts and then fund activities. The other is, as many people are familiar with, CPACE, the you know, the financing that's attached to property assessment for clean energy, so that you have another way to help fund these things. And then we're providing about anywhere from 10 to 30 million a year for installation of solar in the DC area. And you have to imagine that's a high cost in a built out city to be trying to find real estate for solar. But so we're underwriting that, and our solar renewable energy credits are the highest in the country. In Maryland, they're around $35 for a renewable energy credit. In DC, they're $435. So we're incentivizing roofs, incentivizing homeowners, building owners, and then we share the power when we help fund it through power purchase agreements with low income residents to cut their power bills in half. So we're doing a lot. We can do more, but it's viewed that we have to share the risk. Risk is cost. We have to help with the new technology and invest in that, and then really push the envelope. And there's new possibilities. I'm also chair of DC Water. We have rights to our sewer pipes all through the city. Is that a new place to look at what AGU did on a greater scale for some neighborhoods as we look at district power or district energy for neighborhoods? So the government has to be a partner in order to meet these ambitious goals.
So Tommy, you've talked about a lot of different partnerships, lots of different initiatives. Do you feel like there's going to be more of a a push with incentives, or do you think there's, or I should say a pull, a pull with incentives, or do you think there's going to be pushes with regulations and edicts from governments, or will it really depend on the state? What's your take on that?
That's a great question. DC passed the very first building energy performance standards. You have these carrots out there, but if even with the surcharges to help fund these things, generally the power bill for our commercial buildings are not that high in terms of relationship to the rest of the country. The incentives do not seem to be great enough to have the full uptake of these programs that you would expect. So we passed building energy performance standards that will go into effect within the next 5 years that say, using the Energy Star measure, if you don't meet these performance standards, you'll be fined a very heavy amount. And so it's going to be carrot and stick. And, New York did the same thing, New York City right after us. And I think that jurisdictions across the country, they're anxious about this. It's popular to provide carrots, not popular to provide sticks, but we're doing it. And the question is, the Urban Land Institute, ULI, came in and did a study of our town buildings in our building improvement district. And this is pre-COVID. And they said, these are the right standards. You need to do this and you can do this. And so they provided the lead of that team was from Jones LaSalle, some of the best folks in the country to be able to say, can you meet these building energy performance standards? And at that time they said yes. But obviously the pandemic is going to change some of the equation, but I expect the new administration is going to do something somewhat similar.
Okay, great. Thanks for that perspective, Tommy. I want to open up the floor for a minute for questions. Kevin, if you have any questions, let's go ahead and see what you've got. And for those attendees, if you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the chat box so that Kevin can see them and ask them.
Yeah, Joe, we have a couple questions and a couple comments, all good. First one is directed at Lisa, but also I think we'd love to hear the other panelists' perspective on this. Can you speak to the future of nuclear energy, Lisa, and the Dominion portfolio? How does that fit into the overall portfolio?
Yeah, so the answer to that question really depends on the part of the country that you're in. Some nuclear plants are struggling right now because the price of solar or wind has depressed electric prices so much that nuclear plants are not in the money. Our nuclear plants are doing well. In fact, we are working, as a number of other companies are, to relicense our nuclear plants for another couple of decades. Why is that important? It's important because nuclear is carbon free. And especially if you're trying to get to net zero by 2050, or maybe net zero earlier, 2040, 2045, the US is going to hit a big cliff if all of our nuclear plants close. So we think extending the life of our nuclear plants is the right thing to do, and we're working really hard right now with our regulators and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to do that. So strong future for nuclear in Virginia, South Carolina, and Connecticut.
And I agree completely with Lisa. When there was the merger between Pepco and Exelon, there were communities that were very frustrated or upset about the merger, saying, well, Exelon has nuclear power plants. And I was very clear that I don't see how we don't utilize nuclear in many parts of the country. I mean, it's not the whole country, but you have to have a base power. Currently, wind and solar, until batteries get to be a different level, or hydrogen storage, you have to have a base power. And as Lisa said, it's carbon zero, and we have to have that. And I think we have to have subsidies to our nuclear power plants that keep them online, because again, green power is great. We're going to get there, but until we come up with a different carbon zero base power, we're in trouble.
Kevin, what other questions do you have?
Yeah, I have one more question. Let's direct this one to more Andy and Roger on the design side. And the question is, Andy and Roger, how do you think the design professionals, overall, are making a connection from more discrete discipline approach to interconnected systems, and the impact of individualized design decisions on long-term aspects of design operations, as a complete picture.
I can take a stab. I think designers are looking at opportunities between buildings, and it's not just on the electricity side. I'll give it an example. When you're building a development and you have a residential building next to an office building might use a lot of water for cooling tower water makeup, for example, where the residential building beside it is a great source of waste gray water that can be used and processed and used for the makeup of that office building. So there can be a real symbiotic relationship between buildings of different use types. Same thing on the power side, in terms of when those buildings peak. And if you've got an infrastructure that is serving multiple buildings, you can get a lot of economy out of considering the loads of those buildings happening together rather than just as individual units. The other thing that I would say, I think for engineers in the market, that there's really a great opportunity on the education side. Tommy referenced the American Geophysical Union building. There's systems within that building. They have the sewer heat recovery system. They also have radiant sealing systems and digital electricity systems. These are systems that they may be prevalent in other countries, but they have not been in the United States. So as we move to net zero energy buildings, we're going to have to embrace these systems, meaning that there is an opportunity for education of the design community, of engineers, designers, the construction community, but also the operational and maintenance folks that are going to take care of the buildings long term. And by gaining those skills, they're not only going to help these buildings become a reality, but they're also going to be able to differentiate themselves in the U.S. market.
Andy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll build a little bit on that. It's the systems thinking for going beyond individual disciplines and the need for systems thinkers is really a really big deal in engineering right now. And what we've seen this for many years, but it's really becoming more and more appreciated and incorporated into projects, which is modeling, not only for resource modeling, so energy, water, wastewater, but also the cost modeling that goes along with it. So a team, a vast team that has lots of different people, finance people, building owners, lots of stakeholders that come from different backgrounds, not necessarily technical, but the common language is often money. And so having a model where you could say like, oh, does that chilled beam or sewer heat recovery system, how does that compare to what we were thinking of doing or what a baseline was? That oftentimes is a really powerful way to move a project forward, move good ideas forward that sometimes get lost because you just can't see, the project team can't see the value without that. So that's something that we try to foster at Jacobs and my team to enable some of these solutions to come to fruition.
So Andy and Roger, I want to stick with you both for a minute, and we're going to move on to our next section. Other than what we've talked about, there's going to be incentives, or there are currently incentives from government agencies. There's programs to help. There may be regulations in certain places. Other than those, what other reasons do you give when you're saying, hey, you should try to design a net zero building because of X, Y, and Z? How do you answer that, Andy?
I read a story recently that like one of the most important quotes, and we'll see at the end of the century, but it's around like the imperative of meeting decarbonization of society. And just recently, I think it's COVID galvanized people like, okay, 50% 2030, 100% 2050. That reasoning like 10 years ago, it was really that question you just asked was like, well, it was very much why. And there was a lot of different answers to it. The answer now has become a lot clearer, is that there's some really valid evidence, and the majority of folks are aligning around that, which makes the answer to that question a lot easier. And in fact, we don't even get it asked. It's just, how do we make this happen?
Roger, are you seeing the same thing, or do you have a different experience?
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. I think what we're living through right now with this COVID emergency has had some positive impacts. And I think one of the impacts is that we're now thinking about these buildings that we live in and we work in, and we're thinking about them differently. They're not these dumb boxes that just provide sort of heating, cooling, and power to us. We think about the air that we breathe in these buildings, and is the building protecting me? You know, if there's a crisis, is my building going to continue to perform? You know, the topic of resiliency comes into into the equation. And a net zero energy building by definition is a very resilient building. And net zero energy buildings tend to be highly sustainable with a high focus, not only on the energy that they're consuming, but on the quality of air that they're delivering and breathing, and the efficiency of the filtration in the system. So I think that the COVID crisis is actually going to fuel the movement towards net zero energy at a faster pace than we've seen before, for some of these reasons.
Okay, great. I want to now ask Lisa and Tommy a question here. Lisa, I'm going to start out with you, and then I'll go to Tommy. Do you all see official rating systems coming down the line, like LEED certification or other types of, good housekeeping seal of approval? Is Dominion working on anything like that, Lisa?
Yeah, so I'm going to address your former question
Sure.
first. So, there's been a huge push in the United States for a while to decarbonize the electric sector, which is why our electricity is much greener than it has been. And that focus now is really turning to the transportation sector, and it will turn to the industrial sector, the building sector. Heck, I had a meeting yesterday with somebody talking about electric tractors for the agriculture sector. So this sort of spotlight that's been on the electric sector is now moving to other sectors. And so it's definitely coming like a building sector. That is why I think people should be focused on making their buildings greener, doing it before the regulations come, or at least having a plan to do it before the regulations come, right? Know where you want to head and then help shape the regulations to get there. As far as certification systems, that's not Dominion's business. All new buildings we're building are LEED. We're working with our customers to help them go green. We have energy efficiency programs, we have home audits, we have commercial audits. So we're doing what we can to help our customers go greener, but we're not in the ratings or certification system.
Okay. And Tommy, I'm going to ask you that same question. And at the same time, I just want to let folks know we're going to post quite a few links that Tommy has provided to us in the chat section. So Daphne's going to post those for us. And Tommy, what's your take on whether we're going to have these certifications or other types of stamps of approval?
So the first thing is that in DC, 74% of the greenhouse gases caused by the city is from use of our buildings. And so that's why our target first, we're going to get the greatest gains in decarbonizing by addressing buildings. So there's, obviously there's the LEED standards and things that people are familiar with. We've now created, as I was talking about, the building energy performance standards that we're working with buildings and building owners to put out there, and we've just put them out, and that is based on Energy Star. We're glad that the new administration is going to keep Energy Star ratings, and they're getting smarter about how they're using Energy Star to try to say, okay, what's the difference between a hospital and a university? Not all buildings are used the same. So Energy Star is working to keep up with it, and Energy Star like things. So that will continue. But I think that for staying on the cutting edge of where we're going, I think that Roger brought up really one of the most provocative challenges in the country when you're dealing with buildings. And that was the challenge, will buildings work with each other in a geographic area to build on each other's usage and strengths and how they operate in a way to get to net zero? So already when you have a new development in DC and Marriott wants to come in, they're very resistant to saying, yes, we're going to tie the cost of our power and the source of our power to the other buildings around us as a neighborhood. Because Marriott will take all their buildings in a region and just bid their a contract for the cost of their power. They don't have a business model that says it's okay to tie the cost and future of that building's energy to a neighborhood. But it's very common in Europe. I was asking some folks from Sweden, why is it so easy in Stockholm to bring it all together like that? And they said, well, it's because the government owns all the land underneath the buildings. And so we're not going to do that in America. But we have this whole idea that everybody stands alone, this individualism. And the way to get to net zero, if we're smart, is going to be what Roger put out there about how do buildings operate from each other. We have the strongest stormwater requirements, I think, almost in the country of how much you have to retain on site, and there's no exceptions. And so for folks that want to use their buildings for something other than a green roof, they start having to use the parking underneath for cisterns and such. So what happens to that water? It's a very interesting dynamic, but that is, we don't have much history in America of figuring out how do I utilize assets from my neighbors, and what assets do I have to offer them. And so I think the government's gonna I'm gonna look at how do we incentivize, encourage, and provide some parameters that if you're going to move into this particular neighborhood, we're building a new area around our soccer stadium, Buzzard Point. I think we're behind the curve, but ideally it would be, you need to have an opt-out, like explain why you're not in this energy system. If we're like taking it off the sewer system, explain why you're not in it, but the presumptions you're in it if you come into this neighborhood. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do this. It may be attached to zoning and some other building requirements, but that's kind of a new frontier for us. LEED's already gone to LEED neighborhoods, LEED certified neighborhoods. The certifying groups are already recognizing this, and we just need to get on board.
Great. Okay, Kevin, I'm going to turn it back over to you, see if there are any questions that you have.
Yeah, this discussion sparked a lot of interest, particularly around buildings as a community. But question, I think, because most of our audience are folks and leaders from engineering firms, is from each one of our two perspectives here, those that work in an engineering firm, Andy and Roger, and those that are clients, Lisa and Tommy. What type of help do you see you as a client need, or Andy and Roger, what type of help do you see that our clients need help to the most in the overall net zero, initiative? So what do you see that the engineering industry needs to deliver to the clients?
Okay, well, I can jump in there. Our firm has been designing net zero projects for a long time. We did the first K through 12 school project in the country, the first net zero library. We were the engineers for the AGU project in DC. So I think because of that, it naturally attracts people from the schools that are interested in net zero. But the projects themselves, one thing that is really different from other projects is energy modeling and the amount of modeling that needs to happen. I think a lot of developers, a lot of building owners, they see net zero, at least right now, as being somewhat risky. And they want to be assured that if they're going to make this investment, if they're going to take a non-traditional approach to design and construction, that it's really going to work, that they're going to see these energy savings and that they're going to be able to hit these marks, whether it be net zero energy or positive energy. And that takes a lot more work on the analysis side and really putting a lot into the energy and water modeling of the building, so that's one area, that's one expertise that I see growing quite dramatically.
Yeah, this is Lisa. I'll be happy to follow up. When you look at the kinds of projects we're building and where we're spending our money and our time and where we're creating jobs, it really is around green energy and then data analytics. So, we're creating a lot of jobs in offshore wind right now, thousands. We're building a lot of solar. We're building out our electric transmission and distribution system to handle all of that renewable energy and move it to the right places. We're greening our natural gas distribution system, so renewable natural gas, hydrogen. And then we're putting in smart meters, smarter transformers, smarter substations, all digital data, data analytics, data modeling, doing a lot of modeling to figure out how to accommodate all the renewable energy on our system. So the help we need from the engineering community are really folks that are trained in data analysis, data modeling, data forecasting, and then engineering of green projects, green jobs, and being creative. As a power company, we're not necessarily looking at sharing power from one building to another building, but we use gray water and wastewater from a sewage treatment plant to cool one of our power plants. We're using hog poop, right, to create green natural gas. So we're looking for non-traditional solutions. So we need engineers that can think non-traditional solutions and help us get greener.
I'll jump in there, you guys. I think because it's both Roger and Lisa said some good stuff that reminded me that oftentimes what I think we can bring that the clients need help with is being the connection point of the glue between like utilities and the ideas owners. There's just a lot of stuff floating out there that needs to be brought together under like a common vision. So the utility has a vision to go a direction at a certain pace. And then these buildings and the clients, whatever industry they're in, they also have a vision that could be expanded by a creativity innovation, but those two need to align, intersect very early in a project in order to actually get business results or achieve objectives. So that glue that is really important for the engineering community to bring to the table. And it's not easy. And the tools to do that is actually what Roger said, which is modeling, because that is the center point for a lot of ideas and the quantification of value.
Yeah, I have to also say that that what everybody's been saying about people that can do data numbers and explain things to us, that the problem is in this field is moving so quickly that you have people come in with ideas that sound great, and it's kind of the shiny ball problem where the government often will try some pilots, demonstration projects, and investments, but it's really important to be able to do the numbers, and whether we're investing in demand energy response, what we have to do to get to a smart grid. And when the utility, when Pepco comes in and says we need to create this new capacity of energy or of wires and hardware, and of course their business model is that they get reimbursed or they get paid based on about 5% return on their investments, that as we're pushing harder and harder on wires alternatives, being able to say this is how you could do that and manage the the energy load if you can just get rid of the peak power issue, whether it be, I don't know, industrial batteries. I don't know how that works. I don't know if it's putting batteries on the other side of the meter in people's homes and giving the power company the opportunity to manage those as well. I'm not sure, but what I don't know is how to model it. That I don't know when I push back on the utility saying that's the wrong investment, that for the grid modernization, this would be the right investment. So that's the first thing is folks that can really model out numbers of what we would get out of return of different investments and what would it mean. The second is that more and more I'm hiring people with business backgrounds. We're putting out between $50 and $100 million a year into the community, and we're Department of the Energy and Environment. Now we're doing some of our own job training because we need to get people trained to install solar, and we have solar money to do it, so why not? More and more, we're making the economic business case around environmental investments in a much stronger way. So even when you talk about things out of regulatory environment of what's an economy around SRECs, solar renewable energy credits, I had to bring in someone that just is able to project the SREC market, so I would know what to expect from the private sector when we fund projects. So the numbers is really where we need help, and smart folks that can attach what type of investments in different projects and what the return will be and what is needed.
So Kevin, I'm going to stick with you. I know we got some really good questions here.
Yeah, we
what's
do
the
have
next one?
have a couple of good ones. This one, the definition or the discussion on community has created a great question. Should we change the definition of on-site renewables and go more towards a community or neighborhood definition that would encourage what I think Tommy was mentioning, the European model of looking at renewables generated by a community or neighborhood as opposed to a particular site? Sounds like a great idea. If so, how do we go about doing that?
Andy, let's start
First,
with you on
I'll
this
say is yes.
one.
Yeah, I was going to say yes too. The how part is probably Tommy and Lisa, but this is something that we've been like, I'm very close to this subject and passionate about it. Is like, if you have an extra amount that you could create on your own roof, or a project that's very ambitious and you have lands that you could put more solar on, why aren't you sharing that with like a community that's next door that may not have the resources to put solar on their roof? But that becomes like the meter issue that it gets into a new realm. So I'll pass it over to Tommy and Lisa.
Well, I think part of the challenge is that not everything is electricity. How can you take the temperature off if you have a bunch of servers in a data room, that's generating a whole lot of heat. Can you harvest that heat in a way, either for that building or a neighborhood building? You can even, it's not dealing with just high heat. If you can take the temperature off of pipes that run water through the subway system, there's different places and different ways to harvest energy instead of just saying, how do you turn it into electricity? And the only way that really works, if we were going to take the water out of the Potomac in order to help heat and cool buildings at Georgetown, the electricity would be obviously in the pumps. But for district energy solutions, we have to rethink what energy is.
Lisa?
Yeah, I would just suggest people Google community solar. I mean, we are doing this across the U.S. in a number of places where if you can't put solar on your roof, maybe you're a multi-tenant apartment building, or maybe you're a sort of a large high-rise. You can't put enough solar on your building for your clients in that building. So you put your solar nearby or somewhat nearby, and then they buy it. Now we all know that as soon as you put electricity on the grid, it's not going to go straight to that building, but you offset their use by dedicated solar somewhere else. So that is happening. It's called community solar, and most jurisdictions, including ours, have that. Haven't quite figured out community wind, but community solar is a thing.
Okay, Roger?
Yeah. Now, I was just going to add on, I think it's a good point that it's not just electricity we're talking about. We're working on a project down in Texas right now where, they were considering geothermal for single family homes. And, when we first looked at it, we realized you would need 2 deep wells to serve every home to meet the need. But instead, what they did is we put 1 well at every home, and they're all interconnected. So there is a third-party provider that is coming in that running through the streets of this development, serving 8,000 homes, they're providing geothermal water to all of them. And because it's a system, they can all share energy and they can all take advantage of the diversity between homes that are empty, people on vacation, and solar orientation. And overall, they were able to accomplish the same thing with half the number of drilled wells that they would have otherwise needed. So I think when you think creatively, opportunities for new distributed sources of energy are going to pop up all over the country.
Kevin, I think we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask my closing question.
Okay, great, Joe. Thanks. That's a good question. The panelists have done a great job describing that this is an accelerating journey, I think, rather than a destination. But one of the questions we got was, how do we know we're making progress? Is there a number of a reduction amount of carbon that we can measure and say, now we're achieving progress and we're making things better? How do we measure that?
I'll just say on the government side, government's probably one of the better places to do that. Is we do an annual measure on our greenhouse gas emissions, and we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by almost 30% with the baseline of 2006. And so that's one place to do it. And as Lisa would quickly tell you, that's probably because of the shift over to natural gas that has caused most of the drop. And as Bill Gates is clear as well, is that the hard part is only starting to begin. The natural gas switch has been the easiest part of this journey. The other thing is in same baseline, our commercial sector buildings, we've had the largest growth up to the pandemic than we've had since World War II of new buildings being built and being used. But the commercial sector, the amount of electricity being used has dropped by 3%. And so we are measuring in partnership with our utilities, but the main one that we measure, and it's standardized across the other cities, is the greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. I mean, starting with greenhouse gas emissions, you're calculating your footprint. And a lot of corporates are reporting the CDP and then setting science-based targets. But understanding that what your emissions are, if you have multiple buildings, multiple sites, then you can start doing a Pareto of where to attack first, and then also track progress. So it's definitely a first step.
Yeah, this is Lisa. We've been reporting our emissions since the 90s, and the U.S. certainly has been tracking emissions since the 90s, and it's gotten more sophisticated over time. I would say the very first step, if you're new to this game, is do an inventory of what your emissions are for your buildings, for your portfolio, for your assets. And then within that inventory, look at what your heaviest hitters are. Is it your heating? Is it your lighting? And attack it that way. What's the largest, or attack what's the most economic to fix and change out. But start with your own inventory. But there's lots of data out there on greenhouse gas emissions.
And let me add, for the attendees, that I really think that there's going to be a major ramp up of anything related to energy audits of buildings, with the initiative coming out of the federal government and the concern of the states, but especially the federal government. You have to know what your return will be and how much gains will you make and how much greenhouse gas reduction will you get for the investments that you make, and how much would it cost, and again, what's the return. And I know in DC, we're trying to figure out that we need to come up with a bit of money and figure out some strategies for figuring out what the energy audit would be. There's different definitions of how deep you go, but we're going to have those assessments done of our built environment pretty rapidly to meet the goals that I expect to be coming out of the new administration.
So I think that's a good point there, and we're going to have to cut off the questions here. There's a lot of good questions. Thank you all for sending those. But I think in terms of measuring and what is the goal and how do we all contribute to that goal so that we actually make real change on the climate, I do think we have to look towards the federal government perhaps, or even worldwide organizations to help us understand what are those goals and how can we each help. One thing I'll point out, which was very surprising to me, I just put solar panels on my roof at my house, and in 1 month's time I knew I would be saving money over the long term, but I also reduced my carbon emissions by 1 ton of carbon in 1 month from my household. And I have electric vehicles, so that's big part of it. But that was amazing to me that I could make that big of a change. Well, I was going to ask one other question. It's a one-word question for each of the panelists, and then Daphne's going to close us out. Are we going to achieve net zero, or is this going to be pushed to the wayside by other forces that may be on the horizon? And I'm going to start with Andy.
Yeah, yes, just one word. Yes, we can achieve it. We will.
All right, Roger.
Yes, absolutely. It's good for our business.
Lisa.
Yeah, it's a global imperative. It's not going anywhere. We're going to do it, and we're going to do it, I think, faster than we thought we would.
Okay, and Tommy.
Absolutely. Otherwise, as Greta Thunberg would say, we're committing planet-side. We've got to do it.
Okay, well, thank you all. Really appreciate your thoughts. And to those who asked questions in the chat, in the Q&A, if we did not get to it, I'm sorry we were not able to accommodate you today. We'll see if we can't follow up with you individually. And Daphne, I'm going to turn it back to you. You're on mute, Daphne. We almost did it without.
There's always one, right?
Yep.
I guess I was the one today. Sorry about that. Thank you all for joining us. The diversity of this panel really has provided a lot of great insights and really different perspectives, which I think were very valuable. So don't forget to check in the chat box. Also, we have those links that Tommy shared with us. Thank you, Tommy. Thanks, Lisa, Tommy, Roger, Kevin, Joe. Great comments. Thank you to our Institute sponsors for making this session possible. And we have a short evaluation that we'll send you this afternoon. Please share your experience with us. I hope you all have a great, oh, Andy, I forgot to thank you as well. I'm so sorry. I just realized you're not on my little note here. Have a great afternoon. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.